This is Cohesion, Concepts and Contexts, where we unpack and explore everything from architecture to the human experience around design. I'm Matthew Goldstein. In today's episode, we're discussing working with unique typologies, responding to natural landscapes, and designing with the past for the future.
Thank you, Matthew. Appreciate it. Welcome, Malek. Welcome, listeners.
Hey guys, how's it going?
Well, today's an interesting episode because we've talked about some origins, we've talked about some concepts, and now we're going to get down to the dirt. We're going to get down to the foundations, as it were. I love this idea of excavating footprints because there's so many different types of footprints, and so it's interesting that just recently we reached our 8 billionth person on the planet. And there was a time when many architects lived by a simple creed, bigger was better. But with a growing awareness of how that thinking contributes to greenhouse gas emissions, we're starting to have a new vocabulary around sustainability, organic design. As a naturally global focused designer, how do you design for the future?
Hey guys, so I think, that it's such a big topic to tackle, right? You're expanding footprints, growing people, growing population, lifestyle changes, all of those things. That all plays a role. And how I've looked at it over time and grown into Fill the Shoes and the design dialogue that I've been exploring and the overall social consciousness that we've all been trying to value and understand from a global and a local context, while providing a sense of place and undertaking new projects. It's really understanding like what are the needs, what is the needed versus what is wanted, and then sorting out your priorities from there, and then creating that building program from your wants and don't wants and work from there. I think it's really important to use that as a starting point, and then just really being conscious about honoring the surrounding environment, repurposing nature that's around it, understand what you can use to utilize it from around that context or that space or that environment that's there. Maybe there's already existing infrastructure that you can tap into and really expand upon. I really believe in repurposing, remembering the past and reusing what's already there, and then just optimizing it, because I think there's really special moments in looking into the past and then also just breathing new life into something that's already there.
I love that. I love the repurposing, remembering, reusing. I think that's an ethos for sure. Your approach is indeed a thoughtful one, sustainable design while maintaining, quite frankly, a luxurious feeling, which, I enjoy. But one of the fascinating things I've witnessed when I've actually been on a property with you, I think I've even taken some pictures of it, is when I'm on a property with you, I'm not on a property with you. And what I mean by that is I've experienced this over and over again where I'm actually finding myself standing shoulder to shoulder with you. I'm looking at physically what's there. And I suddenly realize you're no longer beside me. You're there physically, but you're letting the space speak to you. I'm watching you, and it's a fascinating thing to see. And it's so obvious that you're enveloped by your environment. And I'm really curious for you to share specifically, because I've witnessed it. You're definitely a future thinker. You paint the vision in your mind, but can you share actually what you're thinking about during those moments when Elvis has left the building, when you're there but not there?
Yeah, it's interesting how I get into that zone, and I immediately assess the environment that I'm around. I'm sure most designers tend to do the same thing in regards to just looking at what's there, what's already existing. I personally like to orient myself and get acclimated with the space and how it feels, whether it's, you know, just an open field or it's existing structures. What are the viewpoints? What are the landscape? What speaks to me? What are things that I want to highlight? And these are just, you know, immediate gut reactions. So it's not necessarily pre-thought out or pre-planned at all. It's, you know, it's how you respond to something and that's there and be inspired by it. And I think that's the fun part, the initial moments of excitement that you start to engage with the space and what things that trigger you right away. Because I do think that your initial gut reaction is usually the right reaction or the right moment that you want to see come to fruition. Oh, wouldn't it be wonderful to highlight this moment in time? Wouldn't it be great to orient the space like this to get this type of lighting? I think all of those things are really important in regards to getting the panoramic vistas, creating them, being really mindful of optimizing the nature, the space, and intimate moments, because those are all things that are timeless. And it's not necessarily a tile that's in trend, or a flooring material that might be dated in a few years. It's really just thinking about what are the main principles in design when it comes to moving through space, program, circulation, understanding how you're orienting yourself and others while they're using that space, even if it's just an initial meeting or reaction to an environment.
Yeah, even for me as an expert in human design, but not in architecture, the way that you create flow in almost every space that you touch, the indoor-outdoor flow. Can you expound on that a little bit? Just, you know, whether we're in a West Hollywood estate or we're in a, you know, a tree house in Idlewild, there's flow. And what inspires you with flow, with that indoor-outdoor feel?
I look to the clients and I look to the people utilizing that space. Somebody that's utilizing a mountain home, an older couple in a mountain type of terrain that want to get away from the city is a lot different than a young couple in the desert or a young professional in the midst of the city. So you really want to learn and understand why those people ended up where they ended up, and you take it upon yourself to really explore that and put yourself in their shoes. And I think that's really, really important in regards to understanding and communicating with those people and the external factors. What are their inspirations? Because you want to design for them, but also design for the environment and design for what they don't necessarily see yet, and show them options, because they could see one thing one way, but then you present other options, be like, but have you looked at it in this perspective? Have you seen it in this light? And I think that's where people start to get triggered and you see light bulbs going off, because that they start to realize there's so much more to a space, than just their initial wants.
I think that's so valuable, because it sounds so basic, but I think it's highly nuanced to take a vision and then filter it through your audience, not just.
For sure. I mean, I think it's also like painting a picture for contractors and your audience that's there, whether it is an end user, whether it's someone that's a stakeholder, whether it's someone that is a vendor, a subcontractor. A lot of these things are either existing, you know, infrastructure that are really run down, or they're brand new builds with nothing there. And it's how do you paint that story and more or less become a storyteller in regards to painting this vision of what the client wants and what the design intent is and what the goal is, to start to bring it to life. Because that's a lot of it is communicating, you know, repeating a lot of those different narratives to explain a storyline.
Well,
And
it's interesting
really kind of figuring it out.
From a human flow standpoint, and a human design standpoint, there's less than 10% of the population have an ability to take a concept and bring it to life, and it's actually your dominant attribute. So it is very, very rare. That's why sometimes people who have that creative attribute can feel like they're Spock on planet Earth. but again, with this magical moment, and I've seen it many times, the vision that's in your head and like realizing that vision. So in other words, how do we create something in your head, and then how do we bring it to life in that magical moment? And we can expand on this a little bit. Is one particular time we had torn down a hideous house, which I want you to expand on, but I was standing in dirt, and my shoulder was touching your shoulder, and I was looking in the same direction you were looking at, and all I saw was uneven piles of dirt where this former hideous house had been. I literally could have told you, Malek, I won the mega lottery, and you would not have batted an eye because you were present but not present. It's like, leave a message, Malek will respond to you later. He's not available.
I think in when it comes to that regard, you go into a zone, a moment in time, and you're assessing the space, you're assessing the place. And I think a lot of people have a hard time understanding the process and what it takes, but you do have to live and breathe that project or that context to really know what belongs there, what doesn't belong there, what was added on, what's truly historical elements or things that are original. And it's not like I would know that off the top of my head, but what I do note is I take notice and I make note, and we research, we look at the surrounding neighborhood, we look at the history of the property, the context of it, and we really live and breathe that existing context. So then we figure out how to respond to it in a way that is adding to what's already there and figuring out how to optimize it in the best way possible, instead of just tacking on more things and putting more elements and whatever. It's just really trying to peel back, dissect, restitch everything back together, and really highlighting the most important moments for that environment or that home or that space or whatever that may be.
Well, I think the way that you fuse nature, art, architecture, like there's a funny thing that happened with, it was really like almost out of body for me. Like there's all these fake, like 14th, 15th century Tudor homes that look like Universal Studio. And your client was making a movie in Canada, and you were on the phone just going, well, we could maybe save a wall or something. And he's like, no, I'm future focused. And this property was enveloped by just fugly, like expensive homes, but they were not well thought out. And for me being present, I was like, oh, I wonder how he's going to design this beautiful modern space while surrounded by meh. Can you tell us a little bit about this future thinking when we were standing in a pile, and then you told me about what you were going to do before you even laid the foundation?
For sure. I think my big thing is designing in parameters and really looking at what are the inspirations that are there. You know, when a movie sets the tone for a scene, you're about to, the opening scene, it's, you know, a macro aerial drone footage to a context, essentially painting a picture. And that's where I try to focus on, is paint the picture, disregard all of the white noise that comes around it, because if you get boggled down with all of that, you can't really get anywhere. So it's a lot of it is deciphering and decoding what is important, what's not important, what are the parameters, where's the inspiration, how to play into certain visions that you're seeing that don't exist yet, and how you're projecting this idea of futuristic thinking with a client that's, you know, wants a specific element that comes into play, and how you can guide them to get them what they want, but also to pay homage to what's already there. Whether that's something that's an existing structure, or a beautiful oak tree, or really tall, big cedar or pine trees, you know, it just depends on the context and how you play into that. And all of those are really important, and how you circulate through the space, whether it's indoor or outdoor. I think it's a vital part of the process, because
as a non-architect, I just thought it was crazy that one of the first things you did on this house that was raised to the ground was spend $7,000 on this engineered trench that surrounded the footprint, and then to put bamboo, non-root bearing bamboo trees. So that,
and I want to point out too, it's not like we just showed up and decided to raise it to the ground, like as in we just, you know, are tearing apart thing that's already there. I think it was after a lot of research, after we dissected the entire structure, after we figured out how we can donate all of the non-usable elements to Habitat for Humanity,
brilliant.
how you know, to recycle and reuse whatever elements that we could that were not asbestos ridden from decades old, you know. So there was it was more like a surgery versus a wrecking ball. You know, it was more like dissecting how we're moving this part and how we're shifting that. And so I think it was a lot of it was almost we're taking all of these kit of parts and figuring out where to decipher everything and what's the best way to do it. And that was our version of raising it to the ground. But, you know, a lot of the elements were still there. We just figured out how to optimize them and regraft them and bring new life to that. Use that as our origin point. And then figure out how to set up our perimeter. Just like you would for any, you know, you're setting up a camp or you're setting whatever, you want to figure out where your perimeters are, you want to figure out where your starting point, your end point, where you want to take over, what is that space. And for us, it was like, okay, well, we know that we want bamboo and we want certain privacy moments here, here, and here. Let's get that growing while we're doing the design, while we're doing construction coordination, while, you know, all of those elements. By the time the client moved in, it was already grown in and mature, and they got that full moment and not having to wait 18 months for those trees to grow in. So I was just thinking about it ahead of time and really just being intentional about the approach on the design process. Whether it was
just as a minimizing statement, as a layperson, what I want the audience to hear is that this wasn't a whimsical thing for you to put in. The bamboo tree grew all the bamboo trees grew. You stripped it to 9 feet, polished the wood. You had this beautiful canopy of green that were creating shadows and play as the home was being built. And I just, at that moment, learned to trust you creating a process and bringing it to life. And so it was a very humbling thing for me, because I'm like, what is he doing? And I'm like, oh, I need to just trust him going, like when I'm synergizing with you. And you've had many, many testing grounds with taking things old, like you said, repurposing things, renewing things. One of the most exciting things back in the day, because you have so many exciting things now, but I remember going out to the high desert with you to Joshua Tree, and then off-roading for half a mile, and we came upon a literal homestead footprint, cement footprint. It had a few pieces of the structure there, you know, old pieces of wood, windblown. And I'm going, what are we doing here? Have I been kidnapped? What's happening? What's going on? And yet, we were standing again, shoulder to shoulder, on the 70-year-old slab that I'm going, why are we here? There's literally just an architectural footprint. And, you know, you saw this, you saw the potential, but can you tell me about this almost wasteland experience, like, you know, my surreal experience of, I literally drove in a car to your vision. And when I got out, I'm going, where are we? What are we doing? And how much is my ransom? So can you tell me about looking at this plot of this homestead foundation slab? And can you tell me about, you know, this architectural footprint and the land around?
Well, I think for that part or that experience, you know, when somebody has endless amount of open budget, they have tons of land, the opportunities are endless, and so there's no parameters when it comes to the creative process. So I always like to find and create those parameters, and I think being really resourceful in a budget or setting a budget and being really mindful of that, regardless if the client has it or not, or if it's your own personal endeavor, whatever it may be, I think creates challenges and it creates moments in the design process that could be explored that are a lot more exciting than just purchasing a product off the shelf or
Yeah.
looking at something that's already pre-done,
Yeah.
because you're really trying to dig deeper into figuring out how you're navigating this process and this part and this part. And it might take a little bit longer and it might be more tedious, but I think the end result speaks for itself, because that is the process of responding instead of like tacking something on that you just found online or that you got inspired by on Instagram or some random Pinterest image that is a utopian idea of what you want, but is not realistic because it's not even a real building or real physical space. So then you end up being disappointed by taking that kind of stab in the dark to make something real that someone couldn't even make real themselves, because it's not even a real thing. It was generated by a computer. And so I like to set parameters. I like to find what are the constraints. And it's not necessarily a bad thing to have them, because I think that's how you get grounded. And you get grounded in the design process. And I feel like you need to be grounded in order to respond accordingly. You can't respond when you're 30,000 feet up and you're kind of like, well, I can do this, I can be over here, and I can do that. It just comes out so messy. And so I think being grounded, looking at the environment, being inspired by what's right in front of you, I think is really important. And not being, like I said, the white noise idea of don't get distracted by all the white noise, all of the random rundown items on walls and, random wood on the floor, whatever it may be that you're running into. I think that's just all white noise. You want to look at the environment, you want to look at the views, you want to look at how the space is oriented, you want to look at the history, you want to look and research the property, what was there, and really find these like Easter eggs through that whole process. And then I think from there, start to compile all of those things into this kind of self-imposed algorithm or whatever you want to call it, and then figure out from there your constituents on design and what's important to you and what's important to that space and how to best respond to it instead of just a knee gut reaction.
There's also a literal footprint, which I hope we're not sharing too much of your vision, your future design plans, but there's literal footprints of people hiking through the Pacific Crest Trail, which takes you all the way up from the high desert and Joshua Tree, all the way up basically to Canada through all the state parks. Tell me about that integration of the mindfulness of people hiking, through.
I think for that, it's a lot of it is taking inspiration. And sometimes concepts come to fruition and sometimes they stay as concepts, but those concepts also influence other concepts which come to fruition. And so I think it's a creative process. I think it's unfair for, a random business person or an operator or client to come in and being like, well, I want this, let's put this here. Well, the creative process doesn't really work like that. It's still architecture, is still subjective. It's still a learning experience, whether you're in school or after school, and you're working on your craft. And I think being inspired by different contexts and doing a conceptual project and keeping like improving that design real and sharpening that pencil and staying on par with what things you could elevate or improve upon and what concepts excite you and how you can apply those into different applications and different environments. I think that's really exciting for me. And it's really important for me personally, because even though if a project stays conceptual and it's it's this really cool utopian idea, when a client comes along or a project that is more that can be realized, you can pull from all of those ideas because those are all fresh in your mind and those are all things that you've researched and looked into. And people sometimes are like, wow, you're building a whole project over here. It's like, well, not really, but I am honing my craft and I am learning about new environments, and I am trying to understand what it's like to build a beach house versus a desert house versus a space in the city. Like all of those things are completely different environments with completely different parameters and hurdles that you have to work through.
Mm.
And I feel like if you're not necessarily prepared to tackle those on, you're going to be lost in the mix. And I think this is where the exciting part is you can take some conceptual ideas and you can apply them on your own time and create art, essentially, and then put it out there into the universe. And I think that's what I try to do with some of my projects is put out that energy in regards to my work, and then figure out, people respond to it in a certain way, and you attract a certain type of people, and then you get to collaborate and work with people that way, and that becomes exciting because it might trigger someone else in a different light. And I think all of those things are really important.
Another weird thing for me, and I say this in a delightful way, and we'll discuss this in future episodes, you're extremely have a hard work ethic, but also you do your 2-a-days and your workouts, and you're more gazelle and I'm more reluctant mountain goat. But we were we were on this 150-acre property that you're doing a major project on, and you were showing me one beautiful cohesive structure, and then you were taking me to the next part of the property, and it took me like 45 minutes to go up and down these things, and I'm like, oh, this is so annoying going up and down these little scrapes in the ground. It looked like Godzilla had gone by. But one of the things you noticed was the reason why, before you have these little trails and roads put in, or natural roads put in, was you looked at them going, well, John, those are seasonal rivers over millennia that have carved this. And so we don't need to find water because there's water there. And I'm standing looking over at the Mojave Desert, Joshua Tree National Forest, going, where's the water? And can you tell me a little bit about that? This is not so much architectural, but it is something about your tenure with land. How did you know there was water in them there hills in the Mojave?
Well, a lot of it is property research, and I mean, people buy shoes and people love their clothes brands or whatever it is that they are, buy cars or whatever. I like to research property. I like to research environments, and sometimes it's genuinely just a hobby. It's literally what I do in my pastime. It's like an SNL skit looking at Zillow. Sometimes it's window shopping online, and I think it's fun for me, and it's exciting because, again, you're getting triggered by different things and you're getting inspired by different things. It's not necessarily I'm going to go buy something or start whatever, but it does, decipher what I want or don't want, or what would be cool to do a project somewhere, or be like, oh, actually, I don't really like that one too much. Or maybe I get inspired by a forest in some random state park or whatever it may be. But I think all of those things come into researching, looking into histories of property. I think property is something that is grounding, and it's something that's always there. You have different markets that fluctuate over time and over years, but property is property. It's physical land that you can build a shelter on. That is literally the essence of our society in regards to food, water, shelter, and land.
You've beaten me at Monopoly every time we've played, so you're very good at the physical land. But I just thought it was so fascinating for me, going, what are you talking about? There's water here. And sure enough, there was.
Well, you look up all of the different maps. You look at all of the different, again, it's like this surgery idea. It's like, where are the arteries? Where are the minerals coming from? Why is it shaped this way? What occurred? What could possibly be the triggers that made this environment the way that it is? Because all of those are points of inspiration, but also those moments in time do trigger you during the design process, and then they start to influence you subconsciously because you're living, breathing, and understanding that environment in a way that somebody from an outside perspective is just simply applying onto something. But something that you might have researched randomly about the property 6 months ago, you're now doing this one specific vignette on a building, and it immediately triggers you because the dots connect. And I think that's part of the process. Is sometimes you create over and over and over, all these iterations, but you don't really get anywhere, and then realize all of the pieces of the puzzle fall into place, and it just like clicks and it makes sense. But it only occurs when you work at it and you work at it and you decipher different aspects, and it sometimes feels like it's a never-ending process. But I think looking back at all of those things, it makes a difference.
Well, I think you wouldn't say this, but I have no problem saying it. I think you're leaving legacy footprints, footprints of innovation in our physical land, because you're designing for the future.
And I don't. I mean, as a young designer, I still have such a ways to go, and
Sure.
that's not the first thing that I definitely like aspire to do. I think what I want to do with my work is to educate and inspire people with as a small footprint as possible on, and figure out how people could stay or experience my spaces, learn from them, and then apply them in their own lives, however that may they see fit.
To make their own difference.
Yeah, exactly. Because the idea is like, well, how do you make a difference? Or like, you know, how do you change the world? And what, you know, what is your version of changing the world? And it's such like a blanket statement. To me, it was like, well, I could probably go out to the boonies, out in the middle of nowhere. I could probably purchase some property that is affordable because I can't afford anything in the city. And I have these design skills. I appreciate national parks and property, and you know, how do I find something that's already there and a Homestead Act? Okay, that's cool. How do I put in my thesis work and all of the student loans and all of the stuff into work instead of it just being a book, you know, collecting dust on a shelf?
Yes.
How do I put that into perspective? How do I hopefully inspire others to get educated about what maybe off-grid living is like, or just being sustainable overall? Because it's not just recycling and having a green label product. It's just like so overdone. It's not a Super Bowl ad. It's just really living day-to-day life in a natural environment and figuring out how to respond to it. Because if we all put in our fair share of responding to our environments, whether you're in the city or out in the middle on a ranch somewhere in Montana or Wyoming, it makes a big difference in numbers.
Well, I think the fact that we've talked about footprints and we've talked about vision. And by the way, Matt, I think for when this episode comes out, I'd love us to post a picture of Malek that you happened to capture when he was on a site in his zone, in his flow, and there was all these construction workers around and he was not present, but he was there. So we need to pop that onto Instagram when this episode comes out. The footprints do take you somewhere. And I think in this podcast, I'd love us to take us to the next exciting ventures that you're currently inside of. We've covered origins. We've now excavated footprints, and those footprints are leading us to the future. And so in the future episodes, I want us to get into current active projects that you're involved by. Thanks, Matt, for, as always, being our facilitator. And thanks, Malek, for being here. Anything you'd like to say to the audience before we say goodbye?
Research. Find your bearings, find what you're excited about, focus in on that, and you know, rinse, repeat, and really own it, and you know, become really good at it. Because I think that's, you know, it sounds like a cliche, but it really does put you apart from everyone else. Because I think people get to a certain point and then they pause, and sometimes it's all really about digging a little bit deeper and finding that moment, that aha. And I mean, I do it constantly, and sometimes I am stuck and I feel like I'm spinning my wheels because I don't get anywhere. But then all of those things start to trigger, you know, a wave of new inspiration of things, and you get influenced by other people that you're surrounded by, and how to apply all of those things. So I think sometimes it's right under your nose, and sometimes you have to, you know, dig a little harder, research, and look into things a little bit deeper to
research, rinse, and repeat.
I mean, yeah, I mean, like I always tell people, like Google and YouTube, like just literally you have resources at your fingertips. You could literally type in anything you want into a search engine, and you can come up.
Something that was very fun for me and humbling was I was so excited about this property, and I was pushing it, and then you simply sat me down in front of a computer and you showed me Google Maps over 50 years and the progression of this outlying town that was moving like a blob closer and closer to the property.
And that's the fun part. That's the fun part about it, because you're doing site analysis, you're exploring.
Yeah.
I mean, I think creating diagrams and creating all of those things, you start to paying attention to patterns, and whether it's patterns of things that you are doing subconsciously or consciously, whether it's the diagrams and patterns for site analysis report, whatever it may be, to help influence your design process or what you want to hone in and focus on in the creative process. I think those are all things that influence each other and that are really important, and for me, really exciting. And I wish to find other like-minded individuals that enjoy that same process, because there'd be nothing more exciting than feeling like you're, a grown-up professional working in your adult life, but then you have those moments of being in a thesis studio with your classmates and getting inspired by dialogue and hey, look what I did, and how about this, and what, that type of synergy is really, really fun. And sometimes you get kind of pulled away from it and you're in a little bit of a bubble, but I think it's fine. It's fun to research and seek those things out as you maneuver through your career. For sure.
Well, thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thank you guys. Thanks for this. I appreciate it.
Bye, guys.